Week 7 is here, and running backs remain one of the few positions that you can actually depend on. The bell cows are doing bell cow things, the elite rookies keep producing, and the middle tier is starting to separate from the pack. So let's break down the top 30 running backs you can trust heading into this week's matchups. What's up, Headliner Nation? My name is Brad, the Rankings King. And before we dive into this week's rankings, just a reminder that these are the consensus rankings between Jake and Kyle. And for more detailed analysis, make sure to check out the start-sit videos from Kyle already posted this week. If you want even more breakdowns each week, join the Fantasy Headliners community by hitting the join button below, and that's going to get you access to extra rankings like flex, kicker, defense, and an exclusive spot inside of our Discord, which is always popping off on the weekend. You want to check that out. Now, before we dive into week 7, we've got a few hits and misses from last week. Our first hit is David Montgomery, and Detroit always has the chance to run on any opponent, but we worried about this Kansas City matchup, so we ranked him at RB23, and he finished at RB26. Our next hit was Jaylen Warren, and it's so hard to trust any running back in an Arthur Smith offense. Warren had played well in 2025, but we put him at RB26, and he finished right at RB25. And then our next hit is Rico Dowdle, and listen, we're counting this because we didn't see anybody rank him higher than RB15 like we did, and he exploded again, and he won people matchups. Okay, but what about our misses? And Kamani Vidal. Coming into the week, it was 50-50 on whether or not it would be Haskins or Vidal, but unfortunately, we expected more from Haskins because Vidal, he completely popped off. What about DeAndre Swift? Hey, it may have just been from one big play, but that is something that he's capable of. We had him at RB27, and he finished at RB6. And then our next miss is Derrick Henry. And honestly, we'll take the L here. It was so hard to have confidence in Henry after the last couple weeks, but we'll take it here just to see him score some points in week 6. All right, that's it for our hits and misses. Let's look at tier 1. We've got Jonathan Taylor, Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey, Jahmyr Gibbs, Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, Quinshon Judkins, and Javonte Williams. Topping the list at number 1, we've got Jonathan Taylor, and he's the overall RB1 on the season. 20-plus touches in every game this year, 8 touchdowns in 6 weeks, and he already has more receptions in 2025 than he did in 2023 and 2024. And the Chargers, they allowed just 18 fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 2, we've got Bijan Robinson going into San Francisco, and he has just 13 points less than CMC, but he's already had his bye week. That shows how productive he's been. He's had at least 110 total yards in every game this year, and this banged-up San Fran defense allows almost 20 fantasy points per game to running backs. What about Christian McCaffrey? He now has 154 touches on the season and continues to be all over the field with all the injuries that the 49ers are dealing with. Kittle returns, yes, but everyone else is a question mark, but this is not going to be an easy matchup. Atlanta allows the second fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 4, we've got Jahmyr Gibbs, and he's coming off the first game of the season with less than 10 fantasy points. And the biggest concern here remains the fact that he's only gotten 6 total targets over the last 3 games combined. We're hoping for a bounce back week against Tampa, who allows 19.7 fantasy points per game to the running back position. At number 5, we've got Josh Jacobs, and another week and another 20-touch game from Jacobs. He's also had 150 total yards in back-to-back games, and owners should be pumped again this week since Arizona allows the 9th most fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 6, we've got Saquon Barkley, and the Eagles look broken. I mean, Saquon has back-to-back games with less than 15 touches, and he hasn't had 100 total yards in a game yet this year. Is he really healthy? Because it doesn't look like it, but this week he does play the Vikings, who allowed 19.5 fantasy points per game. At number 7, we've got Quinshon Judkins, and week 6 was a week to forget for Judkins, but there is no better way to right the ship than by having a matchup with the Miami Dolphins. They allow just under 25 fantasy points per game to running backs, backs, and Cleveland will have to run in order to beat Miami. At number 8, we've got Javonte Williams, and he's another running back that struggled in week 6. It was the first game of the season that he didn't have at least 90 total yards or a touchdown on the season. Now, Lamb could return this week, and that would open up running lanes, and Washington allows 19.5 fantasy points per game. Now, before we head into the next tier, I want to make sure that you're all set up on Underdog, because you already know that we're crushing those player pick'ems on Underdog this year. So what are you waiting for? Head over to Underdog Fantasy or download the app, create a new account, and use the referral code HEADLINERS when you do so. And then just make your initial deposit and come join a contest. And listen, if you sign up with that promo code, again, it's HEADLINERS, you'll get access to all of the promos that Underdog offers this season. And check this out. Once you play your first $5, they're going to give you a hundo in bonus funds. Play 5, get 100. It's that easy. And don't forget, Jake is always breaking down the best picks weekly in our show on Fridays. So links to join are in the description, and we look forward to playing with you this week. All right, that's it for tier number 1. We've got tier number 2, Devon Achane, Rico Dowdle, Kyron Williams, Cam Scadaboo, Breece Hall, Rashad White, Ashton Jeanty, J.K. Dobbins, and Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. And number 9, Devon Achane, and he's the overall RB4 on the year, and he's had at least 13 fantasy points in every game this year, but this will be his toughest matchup of the year. Cleveland allows the fewest fantasy points per game to running backs of all teams in the NFL. At number 10, we've got Rico Dowdle. It is so crazy that Rico's only started 2 games all season, and he's the RB11 on the season. In just the last 2 games, he has more total yards than Saquon does all season. Chuba's questionable, and so we are hoping for another start here from Rico Dowdle. At number 11, we've got Kyron Williams, and he continues to be a solid weekly option. He's had at least 80 total yards or a touchdown in every game this season. Puka's day-to-day, and Kyron has had a stranglehold on the backfield, and the Jags are allowing just over 17 fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 12, we've got Cam Scadaboo, and he's one of the hottest and meme-worthy backs in the NFL. He's had 10-plus in every game since week 1, 100-plus total yards in 3 of his last 4, and Tyron Tracy took nothing from him in week 6. But this is going to be one of his more difficult matchups on the season. At number 13, we've got Breece Hall, and listen, this Jets team continues to find ways to look like a junior college team. They're always out there losing and playing from behind, and they are one of the lowest scoring teams in the NFL. It's hard to rely on anyone there regardless of their matchup. At number 14, we've got Rashad White, and Bucky is still doubtful, so we get another White start. There's so many injuries on offense in Tampa, and so you have to expect a lot from White again. Detroit has been solid against the run, but even their defense is missing some key pieces this week. At number 15, we've got Ashton Jeanty, and inefficiency paired with a low-scoring offense can only be fixed with big volume. Jeanty's had 67 touches over the last 3 weeks, and he's been more consistent inside of the pass game. But now he gets Kansas City, and they are super tough to run on. At number 16, we've got J.K. Dobbins, and he just had his worst game of the season, but that international game as a whole was absolutely disgusting, right? Luckily, he gets a home game against the Giants this week, who allowed just under 20 fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 17, we've got Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt going into Dallas, and Wild Bill is the ultimate wild card to play. He struggled in a great matchup last week while getting the most touches he's had all season. Plus, he had a fumble. Dallas allows the 5th most fantasy points per game to running backs, but I just hope that his volume doesn't fall off a cliff. All right, that's it for tier 2. Let's look at tier 3. We've got Jordan Mason, Jalen Warren, DeAndre Swift, Travis Etienne Jr., Kenneth Walker III, and David Montgomery. At number 18, we've got Jordan Mason, and coming off the bye, and we're hoping the pre-bye struggles are gone. He should still see the bulk of touches in this backfield, and Philly has allowed the 8th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. At number 19, we've got Jalen Warren, and Arthur Smith using Gainwell and Johnson as much as he did in week 6 is enough to lower expectations on Warren right now. It's a great matchup, but if he loses touches for absolutely no reason, it could be a killer in a great matchup on Thursday night like this against Cincy. All right, number 20, we've got DeAndre Swift, and he just had his best game of the year in week 6, 175 total yards in his first 100-yard rushing game on the year. Now, the Saints have been easier to throw on than run on, but with the big play potential, he stays inside of the top 20. At number 21, we've got Travis Etienne Jr. And listen, I mean, 50-yard games are cool when you score touchdowns, but when the touchdowns aren't there, it sucks. And so Etienne hasn't been able to find room on the ground the last 2 weeks, and it won't be much easier against a Rams team that allows the third fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 22, we've got Kenneth Walker III, and he hasn't killed it as of late, but in the grand scheme of things, he's still a top 20 running back on the year. Unfortunately, this week he still has to worry about Charbonnet and a tough matchup against Houston, who allows the 10th fewest fantasy points per game to the running back position. At 23, we've got David Montgomery, and Monty continues to thrive in easy matchups and struggle in tough ones. So in a matchup this week against Tampa, who allows the 11th most fantasy points per game to running backs, we're still keeping Monty inside of the top 24. All right, let's move on to tier 4. We've got Alvin Kamara, Ramondre Stevenson, Kamani Vidal, Chase Brown, Tony Pollard, Bam Knight, and Kenneth Gainwell. At number 24, we've got Alvin Kamara going to Chicago. And listen, it sounds like a trade isn't going to happen. So he is stuck inside of this below average offense in New Orleans. But he has had at least 5 targets in 3 straight games, which is solid at least. And now he gets Chicago, who allows 24 fantasy points per game to running backs. At 25, we've got Ramondre Stevenson, and this New England offense is really good, but a nightmare for fantasy. Ramondre's had 3 games with 10-plus touches and 3 games with single-digit touches. The last 2 weeks, he's only averaged 1.7 yards per carry, but Tennessee does allow the 3rd most fantasy points per game to the running back position. At number 26, we've got Kamani Vidal, and he got an opportunity and took it in week 6. 21 touches for 138 total yards and a touchdown. Now, Haskins is still going to get touches, but Vidal earned the bulk of the workload, and so now he gets Indy, who allows the 8th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. At number 27, we've got Chase Brown, and so the passing game has some life, but the run game is still on life support. Brown's only gone for 50 total yards once in the last month. And Pittsburgh's been average against opposing run games, so everybody pray for a big play because your boy is due. At number 28, we've got Tony Pollard, and if Tennessee could get a lead every once in a while, Pollard would be a solid flex. But scoring is rare in Tennessee, and it won't be easy this week against the Patriots, who allow the 6th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 29, we've got Bam Knight, and listen, this backfield is a nightmare. You never know who it's going to be, and it's like the flavor of the week, or whoever head coach Gannon doesn't want to swing on that week. At least it looks like Bam is now the goal line guy in Arizona, so he squeaks in to number 29. And at number 30, we've got Kenneth Gainwell, and it's really due to the matchup and the nonsense of Arthur Smith, and we had to include Gainwell since he's had 6 receptions in each of the last 2 games and in the matchup, and he could get that again. All right, so there's your top 30 in tiers 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we got a couple guys on the outside looking in: Travion Henderson, Zach Charbonnet, Kareem Hunt, Isaiah Pacheco, and RJ Harvey. And that's the full rundown for week 7. Which running back are you rolling the dice on this week? Is it going to be a steady vet or a 2025 breakout back? Let us know down in the comments. Be sure to like the video and don't forget to subscribe so you're tuned into Headliner Nation. Let's go get a dub this week.
Analytics off the chain,